Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Sam Clark. I am the Vice President of TigerDev, and today we're just going to talk about game scope and feel. Um, I guess as for my qualifications, I've led a few game development projects, put one on Steam, just like a small one my freshman year, uh, Unity work experience and whatnot. But yeah, so two kind of main things I'm going to talk about today. The first being scope, which kind of involves things like the size and your goals for your project. I'm going to talk about kind of views of it from both a management and a membership perspective, and then kind of defining success because that's really linked to what your scope is. And then secondly, I'm going to talk about game feel, something called game juice, kind of inspirations of where you're going to take stuff from to build your game, and then also the importance of testing. So first of all, game scope. The first kind of thing you think about when game scope is the actual game itself, the size and the ambition of it, along with kind of how long it's going to take you. So for example, when I pitch game scope to people, I tend to say like, okay, this is a 1 semester or 2 semester project, and we're thinking 2 to 3 levels. So that kind of encompasses the whole scope there. And then lastly, there's this thing called scope creep. Does anyone know what scope creep is? Just show of hands. Okay, great. So scope creep, I don't have like a great definition of it, but it's kind of just the tendency of scope to expand as you develop. And it is the downfall of many, many projects. Also, raise your hand if you've been in a project where scope creep was the downfall. Okay, yeah, that's very common. So today we're just kind of going to look at some things to help mitigate scope creep and to avoid it. And first thing, we'll look at kind of the project makeup when it comes to project management. So is anyone project managers currently, like project leads? You, me? Okay. Um, so one thing I find really helpful, and this, even if you're not a project manager, you might be one day. So but timelines are super useful, just kind of laying out the plan of your project from the beginning, and that'll give you your scope, and then you will keep up with and change that as it goes. And then another really important thing I found is check-ins and reassessment. This involves your team. Everyone's got different workloads at different times. Um, and so understanding, what people can contribute to a project is a very important piece of not letting the scope creep up on you. Because if you're expecting to, design and develop 5 levels of a game, but people only have time to do maybe two, you're not going to meet the scope you have planned. And then finally, organizational tools are super helpful in project management, stuff like Trello, Asana, etc. Depending on your project, you might not need them, depending on how big or small it is, but they can be super helpful. So next who's a member of a TigerDev project or any other project right now? Okay, all three. Awesome. So this is kind of members focused, and this will apply to you if you're on a project ever for development. First thing, you are a valued member. So everyone give yourself a round of applause, please. Thank you. Okay. This is important to remember mainly just because if you're working on a project where the project manager or lead developer doesn't respect you or your time, that's a conversation to be had. Sometimes it's just miscommunication, but sometimes, maybe it's not the right fit. So it's just very important to remember, keep everything in perspective. And then communication is a very key thing in being in a project. Communicating your busy workload, how much time you can commit. Life happens, stuff happens. What you like and dislike doing can help you. Because sometimes you might see scope creep coming. You might see, hey, we thought this thing was going to take a week. It's going to take 3 weeks. And so communicating that with your team is a very important piece of keeping up with your scope. So next, I'm also going to address burnout. Burnout is very common for software developers. And so kind of important ways to mitigate burnout is taking breaks, communicate that you're starting to feel burnout because it's going to go a lot better if you take a short break or have a lighter load this week rather than be burnt out for 3 weeks afterwards. And then crunch time does happen. So it's also important to kind of differentiate, like, am I overworking right now, or are we just in a crunch time area? So keep that in mind. Just crunch time as software developers does happen. So next, how can we mitigate scope creep? I've kind of labeled this as 4 main things, even though it's can be a lot more. So good timeline, checking in with developers or your project lead, depending on what your role is, communication again, and then flexible scope options, which I'll address in a minute. But besides that, does anyone else have anything, they've experienced that they found mitigate scope creep as well? So kind of going into the last point of options I'll mention here, defining success is a big part of your scope. You're the one who sets the goals in the initial scope. If you say, I'm going to make a giant CRPG with 20 classes and 5 different areas, you're not going to probably be successful unless you have a large team or you're a professional company. But if you say, okay, I'm going to make a 2-level 2D platformer, you're probably going to be a lot more successful with that. And so the important underlying thing here is having these specified goals. I find it very useful and important to have minimum, expected, and stretch goals. Because if you have a minimum goal, you at least have something to fall back on. For example, if you're thinking of making a 4-level 3D platformer, maybe your minimum goal is only 2 levels. And that way, if things don't go as planned, which they probably won't, or other things happen, you've at least been successful in your overall project, and it's been worth the time because you met your minimum goal. And then lastly, stretch goals are also great to have. It's kind of an idealist version of what you want. This can involve like extra mechanics, extra levels, etc. But stretch goals are really great, if your team expands or maybe something you're doing takes shorter time than you thought. So having these goals gives you a lot of flexibility if stuff happens. And then finally, reviewing your goals is also important. Are they doable? And then most importantly, what are you willing to put on the chopping block? For example, if you plan to have normal land movement, sprinting mode, swimming mode, diving mode, which one of those are you willing to put on the chopping block? Which ones are necessary for the final product, worst comes to worst? And then another key point is commitment. If you are a project lead, think about commitment when you start a project, because if you're committed as a lead, it's going to be in your best interest to follow it through to the end, whatever that looks like. It might look like just a tech demo, like maybe most things got scrapped, but make it worth your while because you're putting time and effort into this thing. So you might as well get like a tech demo or something short you can put out as part of it. So next, just kind of final point on the scope is doing more. What happens when you get to increase scope, if you are so lucky? Basically, more people means you can do more. So if you recruit more people, you can do more with that. So some good strategies for this I found is having an onboarding plan for new members, especially if you're in the middle of a project. Usually you start out with the simpler tasks when you develop a project and then you go to the harder ones. So if someone jumps in the middle of a project, those easier tasks have already been done. So kind of what onboarding plan are you going to have if they don't have coding experience? And then your qualifications. A lot of the time when you're trying to recruit people, telling them why you're qualified or like what you've done in the past can be super helpful. Just giving them an idea that, okay, this is going to be worth my time. This is actually going to amount to something. And then flexibility. Depending on who you're, recruiting, flexibility can be a great thing, especially for students in the place we are. School happens, life happens. Flexibility can be a big plus. But again, depending on your project, maybe you don't want that element. And then specifically on the recruiting, there we got the who and the what. Make sure to mention what the experience level is, who you need. Do you need developers? Do you need artists? And then you also don't just want people, you want people who are interested in your project. Because if you just get random people who are like, don't care about the project, they might drop off at some point, they might not be reliable. You want to make sure they're interested. And then lastly, the what. when you're recruiting, it helps a lot to show your inspirations. You know, what is this game similar to? It gives people a great mental image of what you're making. How is it different and similar from Mario or Mario Kart or Call of Duty or whatever else? And then what is your guiding methodology? This is kind of what is your game about? You know, are we focusing on gameplay and mechanics? Are we focusing on narrative? Maybe the through line is, you know, I want this to seem like one long level as a whole, very consistent. But yeah. So now I'll get into game feel itself. But before I do that, does anyone have anything else, questions or anything to add on game scope? Okay. So game feel. There's something called game juice. Does anyone know what game juice is? Just by a show of hands. Okay. So game juice is a popular term that is very loosely defined. It's essentially how a game feels. It's like it's basically kind of the it factor, but for games. Yeah. And so the main question is, how do we capture what we call game juice? And I'll kind of be looking at this through the lens of good game design aspects. So first I'm going to talk about some game design aspects. I'll ask again, you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but can anyone think of different aspects of game design? Because you know you have like mechanics design, you got sound design, you got UX. Yeah.
Is how responsive the visuals.
Yeah, responsiveness is a big thing. And so yeah, we got gameplay, mechanics, movement, interaction, and feedback. That responsiveness is a big thing. And then we kind of have the visuals, style. Is it 3D versus 2D? What does the UI look like? If it's a really complex UI, people might not want to use it. And then audio, which includes music and sound effects. And this is not an exhaustive list. This is just kind of a few things I put on the board. So if anyone has any others they want to add, feel free to chime in. But so basically, just some examples of what can contribute to the feel of a game to really make it glow and shine amidst, you know, otherwise being bland. Sprite squishiness. This is an example of, for example, when you're playing a 2D game, when the character jumps, they're not just flat. The sprite actually squishes a little vertically, giving a better like jumping feeling, making it feel like you're bouncing more than just moving up and down vertically. Particle effects contribute to this. Idle animations. Your character isn't just standing in one pose. There's some kind of idle animation which makes them feel more alive, contributing to the feeling of game. Sound when you hit or kill an enemy. This is a very large one. If you've ever made or played a game where you're hitting enemies and there's no sound effects, it feels like something is missing. It doesn't feel as engaging. It doesn't feel as fun. And so this is where we really get into like sound effects and design can really breathe life into a game from the playing perspective. Another example is like in some older games, pop-up numbers when you deal damage, recoil on weapons, animations, and there's just a whole nother exhaustive list. But next time you play a game, you can kind of think about it and look at it, and you'll start to notice smaller things that really make you feel more invested. So next is the inspiration. Inspiration is a very good way to learn and study game feel. Kind of just comparing other games and what they do, what works, what doesn't. So, like I said earlier, it's also very good for presentations, you know, letting people know what your game is similar to. And then kind of to demonstrate this, think about just some like genre descriptors. If I say Souls-like, or I say roguelite, or CRPG, or isometric, it gives you an idea of what a game is going to kind of play like and a little bit what it's going to feel like. So that's just a small example of how inspiration kind of takes form in a larger area. And so then you also kind of have to address, when you're talking about game feel, it's such a abstract idea. It's not really concrete. So you kind of have to notice that different genres in games will have different things that make them feel good. You know, if if it's a shoot 'em up hack and slash game versus like a really slow burn narrative 2D game, those are going to feel really different, and they're going to use different ways to make you as the player enjoy the game. And so now I'll kind of focus on mechanics and sound, um, a little to show from different games and inspirations what kind of can contribute to that game feel to look at. So my first example here is Celeste. Celeste is a game that is very popular for its movement. So I'm just gonna play this whole thing, but I'm gonna skip ahead if I can. Oh. So if you notice, you can kind of see the sprite squishiness I was talking about when she jumps. And you notice the movement is very smooth. It's very consistent. You're constantly moving around, dashing, etc. And so you can kind of notice from Celeste that their main mechanic that makes their game feel good is, first of all, the movement, and then they designed everything else around that. So all the particle effects, all the screen shaking, the screen moving is all designed around movement, and that's what makes the game feel really good, that responsiveness to you pressing the keys. So next up is a really good example of feedback, and this is a lot more, there are a lot of different ways of feedback, and this is just a very haptic feedback version of that, is the Wii Remote. Nintendo really got down a great feedback tool with the Wii Remote. For example, when you play Mario Kart and you get hit or run to a wall, you feel the remote shake. And that makes you a lot more immersed, and that makes the game a lot more enjoyable than if you just hear the noises on the screen or whatever else. And so in the same way, you'll have similar things to like camera shaking, or just some games will kind of pause the game very shortly, almost stutter it when you get a kill or hit an enemy, and all of that contributes to this idea of feedback making your game feel just a whole lot nicer to play, and a lot of subconscious things feedback really affects when you're playing games. And so then the greatest audio example I can really think of for how audio can really make a game feel immersive and well is in the horror genre. Horror, obviously the visuals can be terrifying and whatnot, but horror would not be as popular and it would not be as scary if you didn't have the audio design. The eeriness they make you feel as you're going down a dark hall, or whatever else, even like the sting when there's a jump scare, everything is a lot scarier. For example, if you've ever played a scary game and you took off your headphones, it's a lot less scary. And so that's just an example of how the audio can really make or break something. Full confession, I've not played any of these games because I don't really play a lot of horror games because they're terrifying. But I got these from a top 10 list of great audio design examples. So if you've played any of these, raise your hand, please. Great. Do you agree that these have good audio design? Awesome. Perfect. You would agree with IGN or whatever website I got that from. So now the kind of overall example I'm going to use for this is Mario, because it is a tried and true and very consistent satisfier of all those things I talked about. It has great sound design, the noise of coins, the flag at the end. It's got very immersive music. Nintendo is very well known for soundtracks and whatnot for Mario games. And the feedback, we talked about the Wii Remote, the shaking, all that kind of stuff. And then also the movement. Mario is very good at movement. There's a reason it is one of the most popular 2D side-scroller games, at least the old ones. And there's a reason people still play things like Mario Odyssey or Super Mario Galaxy, because you can have a lot of fun with the movement in Mario. And so, kind of to demonstrate this, I'm completely biased because I love Super Mario Galaxy. Has anyone played Super Mario Galaxy? Please tell me yes. Okay, there's at least a couple. If you haven't, I think they're releasing like a remaster for the Switch, and you should play it.
One look and you had me
Um,
pegged, huh?
oh,
Just another cat lady, about to eat some cat food.
I wouldn't recommend eating cat food.
It's me,
Um,
Mario.
but just to give an example for those who haven't played it, it's very smooth. The music is very immersive. When you're playing, you feel like you're in an expansive galaxy of sorts. Um, a lot of fun is had through the jumping in Mario. And again, this is a special mode of interaction where you are clicking on those stars, and it really is a unique way and design of the game itself. So, how do we create a game that feels good to play? We've seen a lot of examples of this, and now it's time to kind of bring it together. Um, and it really comes down to the kind of game you're making. Like we talked about, if you're making a horror game, audio is paramount. It is going to make or break the game. If you don't have good audio, it is not going to hold up shape compared to other horror games. But if you're playing a 2D platformer, it's likely going to be movement or object mechanics because that's kind of the MO for that. And so some great common recommendations just through some research I did. First being responsive feedback is a very important one. Making sure that those sound and audio cues are there, that, when you hit an enemy, something happens that gives your brain a little bit of happiness to make you enjoy it even more. And then interactivity. People love to interact with their objects or environment when they're in a game. Discovering that you can chop down a tree you didn't know you could even interact with in the first place will make the player feel very excited, and it triggers that almost exploration aspect that people really enjoy. And then again, kind of goes into the other things, but engaging sound design and also music. And so now, examining other games, do y'all have, if I just get one suggestion of a game you like that people might know? Yeah.
Alien Isolation is like the most immersive game I've ever played, and it's horrifying.
Yeah, Alien Isolation. Yeah, because it's horror, right? That makes
Sound design's amazing.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I like Phasmophobia a lot.
Oh yeah.
Okay, Phasmo. I have a lot of friends who really want to play Phasmophobia.
It's a great one.
Yeah. And so what would you say is kind of the best thing about Phasmophobia as a game?
Well, so like whenever you're saying about like sound effects, how like if you had your headset off, it would be scary.
Yep.
So like with that one, the ghost would go around and like throw stuff and like close doors. So like without your headset
Okay.
sound, you wouldn't hear like you obviously wouldn't see it if it's
Right.
right.
Yeah.
So
Awesome.
it's a lot scary.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, one of y'all too. You're on my project, so I can single you out.
You want to say Marvel Rivals?
Yeah, that's what I figured. Marvel Rivals. What gameplay aspect do you think really gives Marvel Rivals the ideal feeling? Or multiple?
It does have good movement.
Movement.
It's
Yeah.
actually the one thing I'd say about Marvel Rivals that's awful is you haven't played it enough.
I'll say
There's good sound. No sprint. The sound is useful.
the sound is useful.
No, it's not. That's all awful.
I mean, I know when I hear a squirrel stampede somewhere in the universe.
Quite wrong. It's just noises.
Yeah, I don't play a lot of Marvel Rivals, but I've played it once or twice, and I think the thing that really differentiates it from other games is the team up system. It's very unique, and it really puts an emphasis on team combos for that game, at least from my experience. Yeah,
There. Well, one I think of is Enter the Gungeon.
Enter the Gungeon. Yeah,
It feels good, but also like it doesn't feel. It feels like most of the time it feels like you did something wrong, even though the game is nice. Like,
yeah.
You can always do something with what you have. So
Okay.
when you lose, it's usually because of you, not because the game didn't give you anything.
Okay, yeah. So balance. Yeah, that's a big one, especially for dungeon crawlers. I think balance can really making you feel resourceful is a great feeling in those kind of games. But yeah, any others before I? Too late.
Okay.
So finally, this is like my last slide, but testing. A lot of time, especially with our scope being student developers and whatnot, you may not know if your game has a good game feeling until you test it. You can make a 2D platformer, but you may not realize the movement feels off until you test it a few times, or even, especially if you're a developer who's testing it a lot, getting someone else to test it, someone with new eyes, someone with a different perspective, will really show you, what's good and what's bad with your game. And then I just wanted a quick mention here, early access in Baldur's Gate 3. Early access is a mixed bag, as I'm sure we all know. But Baldur's Gate 3 is the best recent example I can think of a successful early access. They really took the time to improve the game feel and game scope during early access because they were in it for multiple years, and it quite literally did change how the game felt in certain mechanics from it. So, early access can be successful. A lot of times, it's not. But that's just a relevant example I thought I should mention. And then for small projects, just kind of final note, summary, try stuff out. If it doesn't work, you can pivot. And also just really look at inspirations. What is your game similar to, and what can you kind of adapt from that methodology-wise or mechanics-wise? And so yeah, I had to do that one last time. Any questions? Please ask if you have any, just whether about scope or feel or anything you want to contribute that I might have missed. Because, I don't know everything. Okay. Oh, yeah.
What's your favorite movement mechanic in a game?
Oh, my favorite movement. Okay, so there was a game called Worlds Adrift. I think it was like Lost Skies is a recent game that came out. That's basically the spiritual successor to it because it closed down because of marketing. But its main mechanic was grappling hook, and you would explore these like sky islands with a grappling hook, and that was kind of the best feeling. I haven't played Marvel Spider-Man, but I feel like I would really like it because it's just such a cool, satisfying movement mechanic that's not everywhere. Do you have one? Okay.
Batman Arkham Knight.
Arkham Knight. That is a great example of movement and exploration
Actually,
and combat. Just combat.
Overwatch.
Yeah, Overwatch.
Is Lucio's last name?
Okay, yeah.
Lucio movement is entertaining. But
Lucio movement is pretty good because it's very smooth and it goes with the whole like DJ vibe.
I think we're not even getting left.
6v6, capture the flag. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening to my presentation. I hope you learned something and it will be useful.
We're tabling Wednesday on the concourse.
Yes, we are tabling Wednesday. And then